The concrete mixer was drowning out most sounds on the construction site when my phone started buzzing relentlessly in my back pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me pull off my work gloves and check the screen. Jessica. My younger sister never called during work hours unless something major was happening. I stepped away from the noise and answered. Her voice hit me like a sledgehammer. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand the words, tumbling out between gasps. $450,000? Check. House down payment? Our parents? When I finally managed to ask if there was anything for me, she went quiet for a long moment before whispering what happened next. Dad had exploded right there in their kitchen, his face turning red as he shouted that I was the failure of the family. Jessica graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, he said. What had I done? Dropped out of college to swing hammers like some common laborer. What my parents never knew was that 3 years ago I saved their entire livelihood without them ever finding out. Their family restaurant chain Riverside Grill was circling the drain faster than water in a broken sink. I discovered this completely by accident when I walked into their office looking for Dad and saw bills scattered across his desk like fallen leaves. Past due notices, final demands, supplier accounts in the red by tens of thousands of dollars. That night, I sat in my truck outside their restaurant, watching the dinner crowd through the windows. Families laughing over plates of food, couples sharing desserts, kids making messes with spaghetti. My parents had built something beautiful, something that brought joy to people every single day. They just had no idea how to manage the business side of it. So I did what I always do when I see a problem that needs fixing. I fixed it quietly without fanfare or recognition. I liquidated my entire savings account, $80,000, that I had scraped together from years of working construction jobs since I was 18. I took out personal loans against my truck and my tools. I contacted every single one of their suppliers and worked out payment plans using my construction company connections as leverage. The restaurant's head chef, Maria Santos, had worked there for 15 years and knew the family finances better than my parents did. When I approached her about the situation, she broke down crying with relief. She told me she had been preparing to look for another job because she could see the writing on the wall. Instead, I convinced her to help me reorganize their inventory system and reduce food waste by 30%. Marcus Williams from Premier Food Distribution became my secret partner in keeping the restaurant afloat. Every month, I would call him personally to ensure deliveries continued smoothly. I negotiated extended payment terms that my parents assumed were just good business relationships they had built over the years. Marcus respected my commitment to family, even when that family had no clue what I was sacrificing for them. My construction company, Summit Builders, started from absolutely nothing. I began with a beat-up pickup truck, a borrowed trailer, and a toolbox my grandfather left me. Those first 2 years were brutal. 16-hour days became normal. I slept in my truck more nights than I care to remember, washing up in gas station bathrooms before showing up to job sites. But I had a vision and the determination to make it real. By the time Jessica got that check from our parents, Summit Builders employed 12 people and maintained contracts worth over $2 million annually. We specialized in sustainable construction practices and had earned a reputation for finishing projects ahead of schedule and under budget. None of this mattered to my parents because all they could see was my lack of a college diploma hanging on their wall. When I called them, after Jessica told me about the money I was standing in my small apartment looking at business awards I had won, but never mentioned to them. Regional Contractor of the Year, Green Building Innovation Award, Small Business Excellence Recognition. Dad answered on the second ring, and his voice carried that familiar tone of barely contained irritation he always used with me. I told him I was cutting contact completely. No more family dinners, no more holiday visits, no more pretending that their constant criticism and favoritism was something I had to endure because we shared blood. His response was immediate laughter, harsh and dismissive. "Good," he said. "One less disappointment to worry about." He actually sounded relieved. That was when my phone rang again. Marcus Williams, my secret ally for 3 years, sounded stressed in a way I had never heard before. He needed to speak with me immediately about the restaurant accounts. My recent instruction to remove my personal guarantee from their supplier agreements meant Premier Food Distribution required immediate payment of $90,000, or they would stop deliveries the following morning. The safety net I had provided for my family was officially gone, and they had no idea how close they were to losing everything they thought they had built on their own. Marcus Williams met me at a diner halfway between his warehouse and my apartment. He spread the restaurant's account history across the sticky table between us like he was laying out evidence at a trial. 3 years of invoices, payment schedules, and the personal guarantee that had kept my parents' business alive without their knowledge. "Apollo, I respect what you did for your family," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee with the slow deliberation of a man choosing his words carefully. "But business is business. Your parents have 96 hours to settle their outstanding balance, or I have to cut them off completely. My own company has obligations to meet." I studied the paperwork, seeing the full scope of my secret intervention laid out in black and white. Payment extensions that should never have been granted. Delivery schedules that defied normal business logic. Credit terms that existed solely because Marcus trusted my word and my construction company's solid reputation. "They never even knew, did they?" Marcus asked, and I shook my head. My parents genuinely believed their restaurant had thrived through their own management skills and customer service. They had no clue that their success was built on their failure son's financial sacrifice and business relationships. After leaving the diner, I drove to Riverside Grill during the dinner rush. The parking lot was packed just like every Friday evening. Through the large front windows, I watched my parents moving through their domain with confidence and pride. Dad worked the front counter, greeting regular customers by name and laughing at their jokes. Mom coordinated between the kitchen and the waitstaff with the efficiency of someone who had found her calling in life. Jessica sat at a corner table with her fiancé, Derek Thompson, showing off engagement photos on her phone to anyone who would look. Her Stanford class ring caught the restaurant's warm lighting as she gestured animatedly about house hunting with their parents' generous gift. She looked radiant, successful, and completely secure in her position as the family's golden child. I sat in my truck watching this scene like a movie I was no longer part of. 3 years of secret sacrifice had created this moment of family happiness and prosperity. 3 years of my own dreams, deferred my own financial security, compromised my own recognition, ignored. And it had all been erased by one conversation where they called me a failure and laughed about cutting me out of their lives. Back in my modest apartment, I made the decision that would change everything. I called Marcus and instructed him to follow standard business procedures from now on. No more special treatment, no more extended credit terms, no more personal favors. If Riverside Grill could not meet their financial obligations like any other business, that was no longer my responsibility to handle. But then my phone rang again, and this time, the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. Danny Rodriguez had worked construction with me for 2 years before starting his own landscaping business. We had remained friends, occasionally grabbing beers after work and sharing war stories about difficult clients and impossible deadlines. "Apollo, I need to tell you something that has been eating at me for months," Danny said without any preliminary small talk. "Jessica has been spreading lies about you all over town. She told people at the Chamber of Commerce mixer that your construction business is failing and that you have been borrowing money from loan sharks to stay afloat." Danny explained that Jessica had been systematically destroying my reputation with anyone who would listen. She claimed I was jealous of her education and success, that I had made poor business decisions, and that my construction company was just a front for more serious financial problems. She had been particularly active at community events where business owners and potential clients gathered. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This was not just parental favoritism or sibling rivalry. This was calculated sabotage, designed to ensure that I remained the family failure, while she maintained her position as their pride and joy. Jessica had been actively working to destroy any chance I had of earning my parents' respect or recognition. Sleep became impossible after Danny's revelation. I spent the weekend pacing my apartment trying to process the full extent of Jessica's deception. On Monday morning, I called Tyler Brooks, my former college roommate, who had become a private investigator after his military service. If anyone could uncover the truth about what Jessica had been doing behind my back, it was Tyler. Tyler agreed to meet me at my construction office, a converted warehouse space that doubled as equipment storage and project planning headquarters. He listened to my story while examining the business awards and community recognition certificates I kept in a filing cabinet rather than displayed on walls. His investigator instincts kicked in immediately. This sounds like a long-term campaign designed to isolate you from family support while maintaining someone else's favored position, Tyler said, taking notes in a small leather notebook he carried everywhere. Let me dig into this systematically and see what we can uncover. Tyler's investigation began with public records and social media analysis, but it quickly expanded into areas I never would have considered. He discovered that Jessica had been intercepting my mail at our parents' house for over 2 years. I had maintained that address for certain business correspondence because it projected stability to clients, not knowing that important documents never reached me. Among the intercepted items were invitations to contractor recognition ceremonies, requests for speaking engagements at business conferences, and even a nomination for Young Entrepreneur of the Year from the Regional Chamber of Commerce. Jessica had systematically hidden every piece of evidence that might have shown our parents their son's actual achievements and community standing. But Tyler's most shocking discovery came when he dug into Jessica's Stanford scholarship records. 3 years earlier, Dad had asked me to write a character reference letter for Jessica's scholarship application from a successful business owner. I had spent hours crafting a glowing recommendation highlighting Jessica's dedication, intelligence, and potential for future success. What I did not know was that this letter had helped secure a $50,000 scholarship that covered most of her final year's tuition and expenses. So your own recommendation letter helped fund the education your parents constantly throw in your face as proof of her superiority, Tyler said, showing me copies of the scholarship paperwork. They have been using your success to prop up her achievements while simultaneously calling you a failure. Meanwhile, Riverside Grill started experiencing the problems I had been preventing for 3 years. Deliveries arrived late or not at all. Vendors began demanding immediate payment instead of extending credit. The smooth operations my parents had taken for granted suddenly became daily crises they could not understand or manage effectively. Dad called my phone 17 times in 4 days. I let every call go to voicemail. His messages evolved from confusion to frustration to barely concealed panic as he tried to understand why their reliable suppliers were suddenly treating them like high-risk customers. Mom left her own voicemail suggesting they had been hasty in their judgment and asking me to work things out like a family should do. But Tyler was not finished with his investigation. The most devastating revelation was still coming, and when he presented me with his final report, I understood just how deep Jessica's deception really went. Apollo, your sister, is not planning to buy a house with that $450,000, Tyler said, sliding a folder across my desk. She has been gambling online for at least 18 months, and based on these financial records, she owes massive debts to multiple creditors. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit card cash advances totaling over $200,000. Online gambling accounts linked to her bank information. Debt consolidation loans she had taken out using the family restaurant as collateral, without my parents' full understanding of the implications. Jessica had been living a complete lie while actively destroying my reputation to ensure she maintained access to family resources. The money your parents gave her is not going toward a house down payment, Tyler concluded. It is going directly to pay off gambling debts that could have sent her to prison for fraud if she had used the restaurant as collateral without proper legal authority. I stared at the documents spread across my desk, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and disgust. My perfect sister, my parents' pride and joy, was not only a compulsive gambler, but also a systematic liar who had been manipulating our entire family for years. And I had been the convenient scapegoat, the failure she could point to whenever her own problems threatened to surface. Instead of dwelling on my family's betrayal, I decided to channel my anger into something productive. For months, I had been considering expanding Summit Builders beyond simple construction jobs into full-scale development projects. With the money I was no longer using to secretly support my parents' restaurant, I had the capital to make that vision a reality. I found a 20-acre property on the outskirts of town that had been on the market for almost a year. The land included a rundown farmhouse from the 1950s and a large barn that needed complete reconstruction, but I could see potential that other buyers had missed. The property sat on a hill overlooking a small valley with a creek running through it, perfect for the kind of sustainable residential development I had been dreaming about. The seller, an elderly farmer named William Patterson, had been trying to find a buyer who would respect the land's natural beauty, rather than simply clear-cut it for maximum housing density. When I presented my vision for an environmentally conscious community that would preserve the creek and surrounding woodland, he agreed to seller financing that made the purchase possible. Sarah Patterson, William's granddaughter, turned out to be an environmental engineer with a doctorate from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She had been helping her grandfather evaluate potential buyers to ensure his land went to someone who shared his conservation values. When she learned about my sustainable construction background and my plans for the property, she asked to meet with me about a potential partnership. Sarah and I spent an entire Saturday walking the property boundaries, discussing water management, solar orientation, and native plant preservation. Her engineering expertise perfectly complemented my construction experience, and we quickly developed a shared vision for what we called greenfield estates. Instead of the typical suburban subdivision, we planned a community of energy-efficient homes integrated with the natural landscape. Our partnership deepened beyond business as we worked together on design plans and environmental impact studies. Sarah appreciated my practical problem-solving approach, while I was inspired by her scientific knowledge and passion for sustainable living. For the first time in years, I was working with someone who valued my skills and vision instead of dismissing them. My construction crew embraced the Greenfield Estates project with enthusiasm. Carlos Mendez, my foreman, had been pushing me to take on more ambitious projects for months. He assembled a team of specialists in green building techniques, and we began developing construction methods that would minimize environmental disruption while maximizing energy efficiency. The project timeline stretched across 18 months, with the first phase, including 12 custom homes, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural topography. Each house would feature solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and locally sourced building materials. The estimated value upon completion was $15 million, representing the largest project Summit Builders had ever attempted. But while I was focused on building something positive and meaningful, my family's crisis was accelerating beyond their ability to manage or understand. Jessica's creditors had grown tired of waiting for payments on her gambling debts. They began calling Riverside Grill, directly demanding to speak with Richard or Linda about their daughter's outstanding obligations. These creditors had sophisticated knowledge of debt collection and quickly identified the restaurant as the most valuable asset connected to Jessica's finances. The callers claimed that Jessica had listed the restaurant as collateral for several loans, showing them tax documents that inflated its value significantly. While Jessica had not technically committed fraud, she had certainly misrepresented the family's financial situation to secure larger credit limits and loan amounts. Richard found himself fielding calls from collection agencies threatening to place liens on the restaurant property if Jessica's debts remained unpaid. The amounts being discussed were staggering, over $600,000 in total obligations that my parents knew nothing about until creditors started demanding immediate payment. Linda discovered that Jessica had been using their home address and the restaurant's business address for credit applications, creating the impression that she had family financial backing for her gambling activities. The creditors assumed that Richard and Linda were co-signers or guarantors for their daughter's debts, which put the family's entire livelihood at risk. The irony was devastating. My parents had given Jessica $450,000 to help her succeed, not knowing they were actually enabling her self-destruction while simultaneously putting their own business and home in jeopardy. The daughter they trusted and celebrated was systematically destroying everything they had worked to build over 30 years. Richard's call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing architectural plans with Sarah in the farmhouse. We were converting into our project headquarters. His voice sounded hollow, defeated, in a way I had never heard before. Gone was the confident, dismissive tone he had always used with me. In its place was raw desperation. "Apollo, I need to talk to you about Jessica." He began without any preliminary apologies or acknowledgments of our previous conversation. "We are in serious trouble and I do not know what else to do." He explained the situation with Jessica's creditors in halting, embarrassed sentences. The collection calls the threats against the restaurant the discovery that their golden child had been living a massive lie for years. He admitted they had been completely blindsided by the scope of Jessica's problems and the potential consequences for the family business. "We could lose everything," Richard said, and for the first time in my adult life, I heard genuine fear in my father's voice. 30 years of building this business gone because we trusted the wrong child. I listened without interrupting, letting him lay out the full extent of their crisis. $600,000 in gambling debts, collection agencies threatening legal action, the real possibility that they could lose both the restaurant and their house if Jessica's creditors pursued aggressive collection strategies. When Richard finished explaining their situation, he paused for a long moment before making his request. He needed my help. Not just financial assistance, but my business expertise in dealing with creditors and debt management. He had finally realized that his construction worker son might actually understand complex financial problems better than his Stanford-educated daughter. "I know we were wrong about you." Richard said the words coming out like he was pulling teeth. "But you are still our son, and family has to help family when things get desperate." I looked at Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation with growing concern and understanding. She had heard me talk about my family's treatment and their favoritism toward Jessica, but this was her first exposure to the actual dynamics that had shaped my entire adult relationship with my parents. "Dad," I said calmly, "you should ask Jessica for help. She is the successful one. Remember the one you invested in, the one who graduated summa cum laude from Stanford. Surely she can solve this problem with all that education and success you are so proud of." Richard's silence stretched for almost a minute before he responded. "Apollo, please. We made mistakes, but we are family. We need you. And you made your choice when you called me a failure and laughed about cutting me out of your lives," I replied. "Jessica is your investment. Jessica is your pride and joy. Jessica should be the one you call for help with family problems." I hung up without waiting for his response. Linda called back within 10 minutes, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. She begged me to reconsider, saying they would lose everything their family had built over 3 decades. She admitted they had been wrong about me. but insisted that family forgiveness was more important than past hurts. Mom, you had 30 years to recognize my worth and my contributions to this family, I told her. You chose instead to celebrate someone who was actively destroying everything you worked to build. That was your decision, and now you have to live with the consequences. Sarah watched this conversation with a mixture of admiration and sadness. She had seen how much my family's rejection had hurt me, and she supported my decision to prioritize my own life and business over people who had never valued my efforts or achievements. Greenfield Estates was entering its most critical phase. The first foundation had been poured, and we were coordinating with multiple subcontractors to begin framing the initial homes. The project required my complete attention and energy, not the emotional drain of trying to rescue family members who had never appreciated my previous sacrifices. Local media had begun covering our development as a significant economic story for the region. The environmental innovations we were implementing attracted attention from state agencies and sustainable building organizations. Sarah and I were interviewed for a business magazine article about young entrepreneurs bringing green technology to residential construction. But Jessica was not finished with her attempts to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Carlos spotted her first, driving a black luxury sedan that clearly represented even more of our parents' money being squandered on appearances instead of debt reduction. She parked at the edge of our construction site and began taking pictures with her phone, apparently documenting the scope of the Greenfield Estates development. Carlos radioed me from his position near the equipment trailer, describing Jessica's behavior and asking if he should approach her. I told him to keep working, but to monitor what she was doing. I suspected this was not a casual visit or a coincidence. From my position inside the farmhouse, I could see Jessica walking the property perimeter, taking extensive photographs and making phone calls. Her body language suggested excitement mixed with calculation, like someone who had just discovered a valuable opportunity. Then Carlos's radio crackled again, with information that made my blood run cold. He had managed to get close enough to overhear one of Jessica's phone calls, and what he heard confirmed my worst suspicions about her motivations. "Dad, you need to get down here right now!" Jessica had shouted into her phone while standing on the hill overlooking our construction site. "Apollo is not just building houses, he is creating something massive. This place is worth a fortune." She had finally realized that her failure brother was actually succeeding beyond anything she or our parents had imagined. And in their moment of desperate financial need, she was trying to figure out how the family could benefit from my success after years of dismissing and undermining my achievements. I walked down the hill toward Jessica's car, taking my time and letting her see me approaching. She quickly ended her phone call and attempted to compose herself, but her guilty expression revealed that she knew she had been caught doing something she should not have been doing. "Hello, Apollo," she said with forced cheerfulness, tucking her phone into her purse like she could hide the evidence of her scheming. "I was just driving by and saw all this construction activity. I had no idea you were working on something so impressive." I stopped about 10 feet away from her, close enough to see the desperation behind her fake smile, but far enough to maintain my emotional distance. "You were not just driving by, Jessica. This property is 15 miles off any main road. You came here specifically to see what I was building." Her composure cracked slightly, but she attempted to maintain her innocent act. "I have been feeling terrible about how things ended between you and Mom and Dad. I thought maybe if I understood your business better, I could help them see what they have been missing about your success. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it were not so pathetic." Jessica had spent years systematically destroying my reputation with our parents, and now that they needed financial rescue, she wanted to play the role of peacemaker and bridge builder. "Cut the act, Jessica," I said firmly. "I know about the gambling debts. I know about the lies you told about my business. I know you intercepted my mail and hid my achievements from Mom and Dad. I know the $450,000 was not for a house but to pay off creditors who could have sent you to prison. Her face went white, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. All the pretense and manipulation drained out of her expression, leaving only raw fear and shame. She had not expected me to discover the full extent of her deception. "How did you find out?" she whispered, no longer trying to maintain her innocent facade. "I hired a private investigator," I replied. "When someone spends years lying about me and sabotaging my relationships, I get curious about what else they might be hiding." Jessica began crying, but these were not the manipulative tears she had used during our phone conversation weeks earlier. These were the desperate tears of someone whose carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed completely. "Apollo, I was so jealous of you," she admitted between sobs. "Even at Stanford, I struggled with everything, while you just naturally understood how to build things and solve problems. I felt stupid compared to you, so I tried to make Mom and Dad think you were the failure instead of me." The confession continued pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. She revealed that her academic struggles at Stanford had led to stress and anxiety that she tried to manage through online gambling. Small bets became larger ones, and occasional gambling became a daily compulsion that she could not control. "I was afraid if Mom and Dad knew how much trouble I was in, they would finally see that you were the successful one, and I was the real failure," Jessica said. "So I kept lying and gambling and making everything worse, hoping I could win enough to pay off my debts. And nobody would ever find out." Before I could respond to her confession, I heard the rumble of Dad's truck coming up the dirt road that led to our construction site. Jessica had obviously called him before our conversation began, probably hoping to manipulate this confrontation to her advantage somehow. Richard and Linda climbed out of the truck and stood frozen, taking in the scope of the Greenfield Estates development for the first time. They saw the construction crews, the equipment, the architectural plans posted on the project trailer, and the environmental systems Sarah and I had designed to integrate with the natural landscape. Dad walked slowly across the construction site like he was touring a foreign country. He examined the foundation work, the solar panel installations, and the sustainable building materials we were using for the first phase of homes. His expression evolved from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. "Apollo?" Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is all this?" "Orho, this is Greenfield Estates," I replied calmly. "A $15 million sustainable residential development that will provide homes for 60 families and permanent employment for 35 people." Linda stared at the project plans displayed on our trailer, reading the environmental impact studies and construction timelines that Sarah and I had developed over months of careful planning. "You built all this. You planned all this. My business partner Sarah and I designed this together," I said, gesturing toward the farmhouse, where Sarah was watching our family drama unfold from the window. "She has a doctorate in environmental engineering from MIT. We have been working on this development for 8 months. Richard attempted to process this information while looking around at the construction activity happening all around us. Skilled workers operating expensive equipment, detailed architectural plans, professional project management systems. Everything he had dismissed as simple construction work was actually sophisticated development and engineering. And I had no idea you were capable of something like this." Richard said the word son, carrying more respect than it had in years. "I thought you just built decks and bathroom additions for homeowners." "You thought that because you never asked about my business and you never paid attention when I tried to tell you about my projects," I replied. "You were too busy celebrating Jessica's college degree to notice that I was building something significant." Richard looked embarrassed, but pressed forward with what he had obviously rehearsed during the drive to my property. "Apollo, I know we made mistakes, but we are still family. Maybe we could work together on something. You could be a partner in the restaurant business, help us modernize operations and management." I almost laughed at the irony. My parents wanted me to become a partner in a business that generated less revenue in 6 months than my construction company made in 1 month. They still had no comprehension of the relative scale of our different enterprises. Dad's Summit Builders made over $2 million last year, I said matter-of-factly. This development project alone is worth $15 million when completed. Your restaurant is a nice family business, but I'm not interested in stepping backward professionally. Sarah emerged from the farmhouse and walked down the hill to join our conversation. I introduced her to my parents as my business partner and girlfriend, watching their reaction as they learned that the woman with the MIT doctorate had chosen to work with their supposedly unsuccessful son. Sarah handled the introduction with professional grace, explaining some of the environmental innovations we were implementing and the economic impact the development would have on the local community. Her expertise and obvious respect for my abilities provided a stark contrast to my family's years of dismissive treatment. Your son is one of the most capable project managers I have ever worked with, Sarah told my parents. His vision for sustainable construction and community development is exactly what this region needs for responsible economic growth. But I was not finished revealing the full extent of what my family had failed to understand about their relationships with each other. I have something else you need to know, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recording app I had been using to document family interactions since Tyler's investigation began. I have been recording our conversations for the past 2 years, including the day you called me a failure and laughed about cutting me out of your lives. Richard and Linda looked shocked that I had been systematically documenting their treatment of me, but Jessica looked terrified. She realized that if I had been recording conversations, I might have evidence of her lies and manipulation that could be used against her legally. I also have documentation of Jessica's systematic sabotage of my reputation, her interception of my mail, and her fraudulent use of family assets as collateral for gambling debts. I continued, this is not just family drama. This is a pattern of defamation and financial fraud that could have serious legal consequences. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. My parents finally understood that their family crisis was not just about Jessica's gambling addiction or their restaurant's financial problems. They were potentially facing legal liability for their daughter's actions, and their only son, with the resources and expertise to help them, was someone they had systematically mistreated and dismissed for years. What do you want from us, Apollo? Richard asked quietly. How do we fix this? I looked at my parents, then at Jessica, then at Sarah, who had become both my partner and my witness to this moment of family reckoning. I had spent years trying to earn their respect and recognition through secret sacrifices and hidden support. Now they were asking for help from a position of complete vulnerability and need. I want accountability, I said finally. I want public acknowledgement of what actually happened here. I want Jessica to get professional treatment for her gambling addiction. And I want you to understand that any future relationship between us will be based on mutual respect, not family obligation. Richard nodded slowly, understanding that I was offering them a choice rather than making demands. What does accountability look like to you? The local newspaper is running a feature story about Greenfield Estates next month, I replied. If you want my help with your problems, you will participate in that interview and publicly acknowledge that you misjudged your son's abilities and achievements. You will tell the truth about what I have accomplished and what Jessica has done. Linda looked stricken at the thought of their family problems becoming public knowledge. But Richard understood that public accountability was probably the minimum price for my assistance with their crisis. And Jessica enters a residential treatment program for gambling addiction, I continued. Not outpatient counseling that she can manipulate or skip. Residential treatment where she cannot access credit cards or online gambling sites. Jessica nodded. Through her tears, apparently understanding that she had no leverage to negotiate better terms. Her lies had been exposed, her debts had put the family business at risk, and her only chance for avoiding criminal fraud charges was accepting help from the brother she had tried to destroy. If you agree to these terms, I will help you restructure the restaurant's debts and develop a payment plan for Jessica's creditors. I concluded. But this will be a business relationship with clear boundaries and expectations, not a return to the dysfunction that created this crisis. 6 weeks later, Richard and Linda sat across from journalist Amanda Foster in the dining room of Riverside Grill, participating in the most difficult interview of their lives. Amanda had originally planned to focus solely on Greenfield Estates as an economic development story, but the family dynamics had become an integral part of understanding how the project came to exist. We made serious mistakes in how we evaluated our children's potential and contributions to our family, Richard admitted to Amanda while Linda nodded in agreement. Apollo demonstrated exceptional business abilities and leadership qualities that we completely failed to recognize or appreciate. The interview continued for over an hour, with my parents describing their systematic favoritism toward Jessica and their dismissive treatment of my construction career. They acknowledged that their judgment had been clouded by superficial markers of success, like college degrees rather than actual achievements and character. Amanda's article appeared in the regional business section with the headline, "Local Developer Overcomes Family Skepticism to Build Sustainable Community." The story detailed my journey from dismissed college dropout to successful entrepreneur, including my parents' public acknowledgement of their mistakes and their pride in my actual accomplishments. Jessica entered Pine Valley Treatment Center the same week the article was published. The residential facility specialized in gambling addiction and required a minimum 90-day commitment with no access to outside financial resources. She would participate in individual therapy, group counseling, and financial literacy education designed to address the underlying issues that had led to her destructive behavior. Sarah and I used the media attention to attract additional investors and environmental organizations interested in supporting sustainable development projects. The positive publicity helped us secure contracts for 2 additional developments in neighboring communities, expanding Summit Builders into a regional leader in green construction. But the most significant change was in my relationship with my parents. Instead of accepting their request for simple financial assistance, I restructured our interaction completely. I purchased a 50% ownership stake in Riverside Grill, bringing professional management systems and operational efficiency that increased profitability by 40% within 6 months. The restaurant became a training ground for my construction workers who wanted to develop business and management skills. Carlos Mendez took over daily operations, implementing inventory control and cost management systems that he had learned working on construction projects. Maria Santos expanded her role to include staff training and customer service optimization. Richard and Linda adapted to their new role as minority partners in a business they had owned completely for 30 years. The transition was difficult initially, but they quickly discovered that professional management allowed them to focus on customer relationships and menu development rather than constantly struggling with financial crises and operational problems. Jessica's treatment program required family participation in therapy sessions, designed to address the dysfunction that had enabled her gambling addiction and systematic lying. These sessions were uncomfortable but necessary, forcing all of us to acknowledge our contributions to the family's problems. I created an environment where Jessica felt she had to maintain a perfect anti-spread image at any cost, Linda admitted. During one particularly difficult session, I praised her so excessively for her academic achievements that she became terrified of disappointing me with any sign of struggle or failure. Richard recognized that his dismissive treatment of my practical intelligence and problem-solving abilities had sent Jessica the message that only certain types of success were valued in our family. I taught both my children that their worth was determined by my approval, rather than by their own integrity and efforts. I had to acknowledge my own role in enabling the dysfunction by secretly supporting the family business without addressing the underlying relationship problems. I thought I could earn respect through sacrifice and hidden service, but I was actually avoiding the difficult conversations that might have prevented this crisis. The family therapy sessions led to new boundaries and communication patterns that felt awkward at first, but gradually became more natural and honest. Jessica learned to ask for help when she was struggling instead of lying to maintain her perfect image. My parents learned to recognize and value different types of intelligence and achievement. 9 months after our confrontation at the construction site, Greenfield Estates celebrated the completion of its first phase with a community open house. Families moved into 12 custom homes designed to minimize environmental impact while maximizing energy efficiency and comfort. Sarah and I announced our engagement at the celebration with both our families present and genuinely supportive. Sarah's grandfather, William, offered us his original farmhouse as a wedding gift, and we began planning our own sustainable home renovation as both a personal project and a demonstration of advanced green building techniques. The second phase of Greenfield Estates broke ground the following spring, incorporating lessons learned from the first 12 homes and expanding our innovations in renewable energy and water conservation. The project attracted national attention from sustainable building organizations and environmental engineering firms interested in replicating our model in other communities. Jessica completed her residential treatment program and returned home with a realistic understanding of her gambling addiction and the ongoing work required to maintain her recovery. She enrolled in community college to study business administration, choosing a practical field where she could develop genuine skills rather than pursuing prestige for its own sake. "I need to learn how to succeed at something real," Jessica told me during one of our carefully structured family dinners. "I spent so many years faking success and intelligence that I never developed actual competence at anything meaningful." She began working part-time at Riverside Grill, learning restaurant operations from the ground up under Carlos's management. The work was humbling but therapeutic, giving her concrete skills and the satisfaction of contributing to family success through genuine effort rather than manipulation. Richard approached me privately during the restaurant's busiest Friday evening service, watching Jessica efficiently manage customer orders, while Carlos coordinated kitchen operations and Mom handled administrative tasks in the background. "I owe you an apology that goes deeper than what I said in that newspaper interview," Richard told me while we stood in the dining room observing the smooth operation of a business that had been transformed by professional management and honest family relationships. "I was so focused on conventional markers of success that I completely missed the real leadership and intelligence you demonstrated every day," he continued. "You saved our business, you built something significant with your own vision and effort, and you handled our family crisis with more maturity and wisdom than Linda and I showed in 30 years of parenting." I accepted his apology, understanding that genuine change in family relationships requires consistent actions over time rather than single moments of recognition or regret. "Dad, what matters now is how we move forward together. The past taught us important lessons, but we cannot change what already happened." The most meaningful transformation came in small daily interactions rather than dramatic gestures or public acknowledgments. Sarah and I included my parents in our business planning discussions, valuing their restaurant experience and customer service insights. They began asking thoughtful questions about construction and development projects, genuinely interested in understanding rather than dismissing my professional expertise. Jessica developed a relationship with Sarah based on mutual respect rather than sibling rivalry. Sarah's combination of academic achievement and practical application provided Jessica with a model for how education could be used to solve real problems rather than simply accumulate credentials. 1 year after the confrontation that had forced our family to face its dysfunction, I stood on the hill overlooking Greenfield Estates during sunset watching children play in the sustainable gardens Sarah and I had designed around the natural creek and woodland areas. Families gathered on their front porches, neighbors talked across fence lines, and the community we had envisioned was becoming a reality. The houses integrated seamlessly with the landscape, generating their own energy and managing water resources in ways that enhanced, rather than disrupted, the natural environment. Sarah joined me on the hill, carrying architectural plans for our third development project, a collaboration with the State University to create affordable housing for graduate students and young faculty. Our business had evolved beyond simple construction into comprehensive community development that addressed both environmental sustainability and social needs. "Do you ever regret how everything happened with your family?" Sarah asked, settling beside me on the wooden bench we had installed at the highest point on the property. I considered her question while watching the lights come on in the homes below us, each one representing a family who had chosen to live in the community we had created together. "I regret that it took so much pain and crisis to reach honesty and respect, but I do not regret standing up for my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminished my value as a person." The deepest life lesson from our family's transformation was understanding that self-worth cannot be earned through other people's approval or recognition. For years, I had tried to prove my value through secret sacrifices and hidden support, hoping that my parents would eventually notice and appreciate my contributions. But genuine respect and healthy relationships can only exist when people acknowledge their own worth and refuse to accept treatment that contradicts that value. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for family members is to refuse to enable their dysfunction, even when that refusal creates immediate conflict and pain. My decision to cut off contact with my parents forced them to confront the consequences of their favoritism and Jessica's manipulation. Without that confrontation, Jessica's gambling addiction would have continued destroying her life and threatening the family business. True success is not measured by other people's approval or recognition, but by the positive impact you create through honest work and integrity. Building Greenfield Estates gave me satisfaction that no amount of parental praise could have provided, because it represented my own vision and values, translated into something concrete and beneficial for other people. The strongest relationships are built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than family obligation or social expectations. Sarah and I created a partnership based on complementary skills, common goals, and genuine appreciation for each other's contributions. That foundation proved more durable and supportive than family relationships based on favoritism and manipulation. Personal growth requires the courage to walk away from situations and relationships that prevent you from becoming your best self, even when that means disappointing people you love or facing criticism from others who do not understand your choices. My decision to prioritize my own business and personal development over family dysfunction created the space for genuine healing and positive change to occur. 6 months later, Summit Builders received recognition as Regional Developer of the Year, and Sarah and I were invited to speak at a national conference on sustainable community planning. The same week, Jessica celebrated 1 year of recovery from gambling addiction and announced her acceptance to a 4-year business program with a full academic scholarship based on her community college achievements. Richard and Linda expanded Riverside Grill into catering services for construction companies and business events, leveraging their restaurant expertise and my business connections to create new revenue streams. They had learned to see opportunity rather than crisis in change and challenge. Our family gathered for Sunday dinner at the restaurant, a tradition we had reestablished with healthy boundaries and honest communication. Conversations focused on current projects and future plans rather than past grievances or competitive comparisons between siblings. As I sat around that table with people who had finally learned to see and value my actual contributions, I realized that the confrontation on the construction site had been the beginning of authentic family relationships rather than the end of family connection. Sometimes love requires the courage to demand respect, and respect requires the strength to enforce healthy boundaries. The most important lesson from this entire experience is that you cannot build genuine success on a foundation of other people's approval or recognition. Real achievement comes from identifying your own values and capabilities, then having the courage to pursue goals that reflect those values, regardless of whether other people understand or support your choices. Your worth as a person is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself and others. When you accept treatment that diminishes your value, you teach people that you do not believe you deserve better. When you refuse to accept that treatment and demonstrate your actual worth through consistent actions, you create the possibility for relationships based on genuine respect and appreciation. Now, I want to ask you something that connects to the heart of this story. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members or people close to you failed to recognize your worth or contributions? How did you handle that challenge? And what did you learn about standing up for your own value? Please share your experiences in the comments below because your story might inspire someone else who is struggling with similar family dynamics or relationship challenges. If this story resonated with you and helped you think about your own relationships in a new way, please like this video and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of self-respect and healthy boundaries. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building the life you deserve. And remember that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions, but by the positive impact you choose to create in the world. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to value your own contributions and demand the respect you deserve in all your relationships. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give to the people you love is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes either your worth or theirs.